Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be speaking to Dave Azzopardi from Talking Wolves. Now, this is going to be a really good chat. We're going to be discussing pretty much everything to do with the Wolves. So, last season, the start to pre-season, the very interesting start to the transfer window, and the 25-26 season. So, how are you, Dave?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
No worries. So, yeah, let's just, I suppose, get into it, really. Obviously, ended last season in a weird way, I suppose. Obviously, people put a bit of stock in the fact that sort of, momentum carries into the season. Obviously, the season ended in a sort of mixed way. Obviously, once Wolves were safe, it sort of petered out, really. I don't put too much stock into the sort of moving into next season with momentum, really. I think, obviously, there's a lot of changes, or there usually tends to be. So, sort of, how did you feel about last season as a whole? Obviously, it was a real sort of season of two halves, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was a real roller coaster, really. The first half under Gary O'Neill was frustrating. It was a bit frustrating under Gary because he showed the season before that there were certain qualities. We had a really good start to life at Wolves, I think. Let down a little bit with injuries and so on. I think that sort of scuppered our chances of, a nice little FA Cup run, a couple of minutes away from the semi-final, if you remember. Yeah. Excuse me. And then I know you say that about momentum, but I think we had it under Bruno Lage, where he had a really poor end to the season and you couldn't get any sort of winning momentum back. And I think that happened the same with Gary. I think maybe let down a little bit in the transfer window as such, but I think they still backed into a decent amount. But towards the end, he just ran out of ideas, and I think that was just down to inexperience. I think a lot of it as well, more than anything. But Vitor came in, and things changed immediately, really. So much better second half of the season, saying the right things, doing the right things. Our best winning run in the modern Premier League era, which is nice, albeit against teams I think on paper we should be beating, but the Premier League isn't as easy as that, so I think he still deserves credit for that. And then I think once Premier League safety was secured, I think we slowed down a little bit, as most teams do when you haven't really got much to play for. But yeah, I'm just glad that we're in the Premier League for another season. I'm not going to say it's forgettable, but it wasn't the most memorable, to be fair. But yeah, just happy to be here for another campaign, really.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty interesting. Obviously, like you said, I mean, O'Neill just looked like he ran out of ideas massively, and
yeah.
Towards the end, it was awful. There was a lot of decisions sort of off the pitch as well, as sort of Lamina stuff and that sort of thing. That, to be fair, I think people even forgot about, really, and
yeah.
It was a bit of just a mad situation as a whole, really. All that happened, and then he's pretty much out the club straight away. So yeah, it's been a bit of a mad one. Now, obviously, pre-season's been an interesting one. Obviously, went out to Portugal, and to be fair, there's been a few sort of interesting bits that I've picked up from the pre-season so far. Obviously, there's a lot of sort of a lot of inclusions with regards to players that weren't there last season as well. Obviously, Fabio Silva, one of them that's actually not really featured in pre-season so far, which is quite an interesting one as a whole, really. But what's your take on pre-season so far? Sort of how have you viewed it?
It's a difficult one because it's so hard to read into. We've had pre-seasons even under Nuno where we've lost games to teams like Stoke or Crewe, and then you go and end up winning, getting into the European football. So it's a weird one. I think the main thing is, getting minutes. Obviously, you can get an idea of who the manager's preferring and, starting lineups. I think on Saturday, just gone against Stoke, probably the 11 that he started with, well, maybe one or two players is probably close to how he would start maybe towards the start of the season. But I don't know. I think it's okay. I think in terms of transfers, I'm sure we'll talk about, it's frustrating, but it's interesting to see which players he's given opportunities to so far. Like you mentioned, Fabio there. I think he had an injury towards the back end of last season, so I don't think he's fully fit.
No.
So that's why he's not been playing. Players like Mosquera the same, Enzo Gonzalez the same. Keanu Hoover's probably the most interesting one, and that's causing the most debate as well. When he first came into Wolves, I mean, you'll remember it as well, part of the Jota deal. I think everyone was quite excited because he was a young player with a lot of promise. I think he cost us around £10 million. And he struggled the first couple of years, really. And I don't know. I think he was still a young lad. I think him sort of, respectfully taking a step down to join Wolves at the time. I think by season 2, he thought he'd be competing with Semedo a lot more and probably be on the first team. But that wasn't the case. I don't think he got on very well with Bruno Lage. He's had to go out. He's had to learn, get experience. And now he's been given an opportunity, which I think frustratingly, a lot of Wolves fans are turning their nose up at, because for me, he's a homegrown lad, still young, done a couple of interviews. Yes, maybe it's the club pushing the PR, but I think it's nice to hear him, and I think he appreciates that he's matured as a player as well. So that's probably been the biggest talking point so far. I think it's difficult when you lose someone like Semedo, a player that originally you spent over 30 million on, who was your captain, and he's let go, to replace him with a lad that we haven't spent any money on in recent years. Obviously, we spent the initial fee, but it's almost like, a ready-made replacement.
Yeah.
I think fans just ultimately think when you lose a big player, you have to spend money to bring someone in. But I do think there's solutions within, I use that word solutions, but I do think there's players within the squad that can have an impact and can be the replacements. I think frustratingly, it almost needs the manager to say that publicly, though. I think what Vitor says, a lot of people take as gospel, which is great. It shows we all trust and back the manager. But he says, I want my signings in as early as possible. Now, every fan thinks we need the signings in as early as possible, when in reality, the transfer window isn't as easy as that. So I think if he has an interview the next week or so and says, look, I really like what Keanu Hoover's doing, I think a lot of people almost gravitate saying, oh, yeah, let's give him a chance then. So I think that's been the biggest talking point so far. I mean, it's still early. I think we've still got 3 friendlies left. And some good tests as well. So I think the next couple of weeks is telling. And I think we just need to try and get a couple more bodies through the door before the City game on the opening day of the season. Yeah,
I think that's sort of, where I was naturally going to lead, really, with sort of regards to Keanu Hoover. I think it's been a really interesting one. Obviously, like you say, it could be a PR thing, but also I think there's a few things, a few quotes I've sort of taken from that interview, and it was really interesting. Obviously, he sort of says in that interview that they're finally, this manager's finally given me a chance, and that's one thing that is, I think, is massively telling. Like you say, he didn't really get on with Bruno Lage, and just generally, I mean, also I don't think it helps that Semedo's start to his Wolves career wasn't unbelievable. And I think at that point, it was probably, he was just too young to make that step up. And then obviously since then, Semedo's been, one of Wolves' most consistent players for the last few years, club captain as well. So naturally, that progression just probably wasn't there. And obviously, he's gone out on loan, played I think it was 91 games in the last 3 seasons. He's proven himself at every sort of, in every league he's gone to, and he's played really well generally across the board, especially for Stoke. Them fans are absolutely gutted that they couldn't bring him back. And
I don't know if it's an easy excuse, but if we were linked with a player, obviously he spent last year at Auxerre, mid-table-ish finish, did quite well, played right wing back. If we were linked with a young Dutch lad that had played in Ligue 1, I think a lot of Wolves fans are like, oh yeah, okay, I'm interested, I like this, and they'll find all the positives. Like there's some players that we link to that I've never seen play, but everyone somehow will find the positives over the negatives, which is great. But why can't we do that with a player that's already here and actually wants to prove a point? I think he hasn't got too long left on his current contract. So again, similar to Fabio, if for whatever reason, or if they are going to be given the chance, I think they need to say, look, I'll sign a new deal, or have that sort of ready. But I'm not going to sit here and say Keanu Hoover should be our number one right wing back. No, but I think he should be given a chance before being written off by Wolves fans, definitely.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, though, I think when we're sort of talking about sort of the fan base, and every fan base is like, it's not just Wolves, like, there is that pessimism towards whether it's be ownership or whether it be the way the club's run, or like you say with players. I mean, that is a perfect way to put it. If Wolves were linked to him and they saw that he was coming, even if he was coming from, even if he's coming from the Championship, people would find positives. Like
Stoke, if he was still at Stoke or something like that, yeah.
I mean, like if you look at, even if all you have to do is look at his Stoke highlight reel, and you see the quality balls he puts into the box, and some of the finishes he's got are absolutely ridiculous. But I just think I do completely take your point on that, and I completely agree, to be honest. So I think it's really interesting. Obviously, we've briefly touched on, Fabio Silva and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of players, especially the forward line is very uncertain at the minute. Obviously, Fabio, Sasa, Gonzalo Guedes, Hwang Hee-chan. There's so many players there that have got a lot of uncertainty about their future. And I do probably think maybe 2 of them 4 will leave. Summer, I think, or probably two of them 4 should leave at some point. But I just wanted to get your opinion on that, really, because there are so much sort of talking points around that forward line.
Yeah, I think it's an area that needs strengthening, but I think at the moment, Wolves have just got too many players in that area as well. And I think that's another frustrating sort of part of the transfer window, is that, we want to be proactive and bring forward players in, but say we bring in another 2 good forwards, you're still stuck with Hwang and Guedes for argument's sake. You know, you've almost got like 6 players. You've got 3 or 4 players that are unhappy that are not playing football. It's a really difficult position to be in, as you know, for the guys sorting the transfers out. But no, I probably agree. I mean, I would love Fabio to stay and have some sort of impact at Wolves, but I just don't think. I think we're past that now. I think for Wolves and him are just never going to fit. So I think he probably needs to move on for the good of his career. His stock's fairly high after a good season last year in Spain, so we could probably get a bit of money for him. Sasha, I'm intrigued by. I don't think he'll. Again, there's been rumours that he may still move out on loan this summer, but I think he's looked pretty sharp in the the Stoke game. He had half an hour, and his movement off, not so much his movement off the ball, but his his quick passing, his layoff, his hold up plays looks pretty good.
Yeah.
And then Guedes and Hwang, I just think they're both confidence players. And I think I've seen really good moments from Gedge, and then I've seen like really lazy and frustrating moments. Hwang, not so much laziness, but just nothing falls for him. And even Saturday, he scored obviously the rebound off the penalty, but I'm glad he scored that, because if that penalty was saved and he didn't get the chance of the rebound, it would have been a toxic place on social media on Saturday. So I think they've both got the quality to play top level football. Even when I've seen Hwang link with Birmingham, I think respectfully to them, and I know they're on the up, but he's better than that. He could play at a better level than that. So I don't know. I think, like you said, I think you're right. I think 2 of those 4 probably have to go. I think Fabio will be one. And then it'll be between Hwang and Gedge. I'll be very shocked if both of them are here come the end of the transfer window. I couldn't tell you who it will be at the moment. I think it's just whoever Wolves can get the most money for. Looks like it might be Gedge at the moment, but I don't know. I won't lose sleep over either of them going, to be honest.
No.
Not that I dislike them so much as people or players, but I think we need better. We need more. We need consistency. And both of them have got little injuries in them as well. So I think we just need that level of consistency a little bit more. When you've got players like that, respectfully, when you've got players like that on the bench, I'm not looking at them to say, right, let's bring Hwang on at 70 minutes to make a difference. And that's the frustrating bit at the moment. So, I think for the good of their careers as well, they probably need to move on as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like you say, I would be very surprised if all of them or at least 2 of them haven't moved on this summer. I think it's also interesting the fact that, like you say, Fabio Silva's stock's relatively high, and it doesn't really seem. Also, he doesn't seem like the type of striker that Vitor Pereira necessarily sort of needs in this squad. And I think Sassa's closer to Strand Larsen in terms of a profile than any of the ones obviously at the club. And I think obviously if there's one man that deserves a chance and has had rotten luck, I mean, he's had 3 ACL injuries in 5 years. It's just like people have got this narrative that he's injury prone. And for me, I find that really difficult to deal with when you've had such a freak injury happen 3 times. Like for me, you can't be an injury prone. I mean, similarly sort of when Wolves were linked to Harvey Elliott, like, at the end of the season, it was people saying he's injury prone. He broke his leg and he broke his ankle. Like they're not everyday injuries. They're not hamstrings, are they, or stuff like that? So yeah, I think it's a tough one with them. But obviously, with Wolves at the minute, it feels like it's sort of, and maybe it's just because it's sort of in our echo chamber and we're sort of involved in a lot of it. But it just feels like there is a lot of sort of negative talk, and especially with transfers. And I don't want to make this video all about transfers. That's absolutely not the aim of it. But it wouldn't be sort of a video currently about the Wolves if we weren't speaking about something going on. Obviously, there has been a lot of links died down. Obviously, missed out on Pubier from Almeria, missed out on Samuel Lino as well, and there's a lot of sort of, I mean, even there's not any promising links really at the moment either, which is probably more concerning than missing out on players, because I think I'm very much of the stance of, if Wolves are missing out on Lino, I mean, to Flamengo, a Brazilian club, Brazilian player, €5 million net reported for, his wages and stuff like that as well. And also the players that they're in the market for, I think they're shopping in the right market. I think they're moving in the right direction. I think if they're missing out on players of that quality, but they're even in that market for them, then I think they're doing the right thing. It's just a case of, fans want players through the door and people are getting frustrated at it. But for me, I'm very much of the stance that it will come. It will come. It just, people are very quick to people are very quick to jump on Jeff Shee and Fosun and Tetty. I mean, I haven't seen actually many people jumping on Tetty, which is mad.
Yeah.
One of the ones mainly involved, well, the one mainly involved in the transfers. But people just think that it's this sort of Fosun and Shee issue. But yeah, I think it's very interesting with the window so far. But I sort of want to go and move on from the transfers really, because it's very easy to speak about the negatives in my opinion, and it is, but it hasn't been a positive window. No one's saying that, but there has still been massive positive moves. Obviously, Jean Arias is a brilliant deal, and Fer Lopez has looked really sharp in pre-season as well. Someone that I've been quite impressed with. I thought he looked sharp against Stoke and looked really sharp otherwise. So I just wanted to get your sort of take on those two deals really, because they are the positives from this window.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's positives of two forward players, two players that I think will make an impact this season. And no, just quickly going back to what you were saying about the transfers, I think Wolves, like you said, are in the right areas. Just trying to find a balance as a fan to say, like, yes, you're desperate for transfer news, or yes, you're desperate for moves. But like, if Wolves can't go out there and just spend 30 to 40 million on a player, that they don't think is worth it, and as fans, I don't think that they're worth it either. So it's just a real fine balance at the moment. And I think later on in the window, where players start to realise that they're not going to get this big move to a top 4 team, or they realise that they're not going to be playing as many minutes as they want this season, that's when the moves will start to happen. And it's frustrating, but it happens every window. That's why there's a deadline day. If everyone was getting in their transfers on the 1st of July, it would be no fun, would it? And Wolves have always done the same. But no, I'm glad we got the two in. Fer Lopez has looked sharp, like you say. He looks like a really talented young player. Played well against Stoke. I think he's got a good chance of making an impact this season. Seems quite enthusiastic, wants to get on the ball, wants to play. And Jean Arias, I'm excited about as well. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say I've seen loads and loads of him, but I think off the what I saw in the Club World Cup looks really promising. They were against good quality teams. And, in Brazil, so much noise about him being one of the better players out in Brazil, one of the most consistent players in Brazil over the last few years. So I think that's exactly what Wolves need. He probably is the Cunha replacement, although not like for like. I think in terms of, adds that work rate, adds that little bit of quality on the ball, can strike from range, which I think is going to be nice, and score a few goals. We haven't scored many free kicks at Molineux over the last few years, so something like that would be nice to see as well. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him. I think he'll be with the squad this week, and I'm going to Girona next weekend, so I see the first glimpses of him, which will be nice. It's exactly what Wolves need, players like that. And I think 27, so I think I say no sell on. I think there probably will be if Wolves ever wanted to move him on. But a player that's got experience, he's pretty much in his prime now for less than £20 million. They're the sort of deals that Wolves, want to be looking at. So yeah, I'm quite excited about him, and yeah, a lot of noise about him being a good player, getting the number 10 shirt. So hopefully he lives up to that this season.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I was sort of found quite interesting, is the fact that it almost feels like the perfect deal, and I don't think people are sort of looking at it sort of as that, because obviously they, like we as humans, we always focus on negatives, don't we, before the positives, and and I do think in the Jean Arias case, like you say, it's nowhere near a direct replacement, because frankly, there's not many players in world football that have that sort of style of play, that maverick play anymore. Like Matheus Cunha, they just don't do that. But in terms of a Vitor Pereira system of players and players that his work rate, his system's very much built on work rate and before quality. Really, I mean, Marshall Monetzi is the prime example of that. Now, I'm not saying that he's not a good footballer, but in terms of last season he played so much because of what he offers off the ball, and obviously, he gets his goals and he gets a really good strike against Brentford as well. But in terms of technical quality, that's not his perhaps his game, and it's a very sort of he's not nowhere near a 10. I mean, when they signed him, he was arguably a 6 and an 8 really. And obviously he ended up doing that job really well for Wolves in the end. But I do think in terms of Jean Arias is a massively exciting signing. And then Fer Lopez again, I think I've seen a lot of people sort of trying to put a negative spin on it, but I just think realistically, if you've got so much negativity going on about the transfer window, surely you can look for those positives, and I don't think a lot of people are doing that at the moment. But you could, it's not just this season. We've seen it for years now, really. But in terms of going into next season now, I think, obviously, we've discussed the transfers, we've discussed the pre-season. I think the only thing I sort of wanted to sort of touch on, really, aside from that, is obviously the lack of depth in certain areas as well. Like we've briefly touched on the wing backs and fullback areas, whichever way you want to look at it. I think Keanu Herver. I don't think you're in terrible shape if Keanu Herver's a starting fullback. Equally, you're in really good shape if Bueno and Herver are backup options. I think that's unbelievable shape. Obviously, Bueno's played really well at Feyenoord. I do have my concerns around in regards to his sort of physical stature and his sort of defending side of his game. But in terms of if them two are depth options next season, Wolves are in excellent shape. But for you, sort of, where are you looking at the squad needed to be improved? For me, I think probably maybe one more forward, as you said. Some of them will be moved on, and then I think you're looking at midfield depth massively, because once João Gomez and Andre are out the team, you're probably looking at dropping Manetzi back, and obviously Bellegarde and that is in there, but none of them are really similar to them two. So I think it's midfield depth and then obviously fullbacks for me. But I was just wondering your take on it as a fan.
Yeah, I mean, going through it like position by position, there's a lot of people clamoring to get a new goalkeeper, which I think that'd be a luxury this summer. But I don't think it's a desperate need. I think Johnston will probably move on in some capacity. And I thought Sarr second half of the season did well in the Vitor Pereira, so he was solid. Defensively, we're okay. I think we need another centre-back. Vitor said he wants another left-sided centre-back, but I think even on Saturday, Mosquera's still not ready. Bueno was ill, and then all of a sudden you look and you think, we actually only got three centre-halves, which includes Matt Doherty, who, by trade probably isn't really a centre-back. The wing-back position's weird for me, because obviously you got Hugo Bueno, which he'll stay, which is good. Keanu Hoover, if he stays, good. Then you've got, obviously, on the right-hand side, you've got, Rodrigo Gomez can play both. But I think, for me, if Hoover stays, I think it's a weird situation for Rodrigo Gomez, because, like you said, if Wolves look to bring in a new left wing back and a right wing back, where does Rodrigo Gomez sit in that position? Obviously, we know he can play further up as well, but where are his minutes going to come from? And I think people last season, everyone was saying, Rodrigo Gomez will be Semedo's replacement, whatever. But now he's not even being mentioned in that. Or if Vitor says, we're going to use Rodrigo Gomez as the number one right wing back, I don't know where, like I said earlier, I think people just expect as soon as you lose a player, you have to spend money to replace them. I don't think necessarily that's the case. And then Pedro Lima, obviously, I think if another right wing back comes in, I think he probably has to move on loan, to be fair. He misses the start of the season anyway on international duty with Brazil. So I think he needs minutes. Midfield, I think definitely. I'm surprised they sanctioned the loan moves for Boubacar and Tommy Doyle so quickly without having a replacement close by. Like you mentioned, I think Manetzi and Bellegarde can do a job there if needed. I think it'd be rare for both of them have to play at the same time in that role. But both of them, especially Jean-Rick and Bellegarde, they showed that they can play there. We beat Villa at Molineux earlier on this year with Bellegarde in the two, and he played really well. And then the forward position, it's just a little bit of a mess in that forward area. I think Strand Larsen, if you take Fabio out the equation, I think Strand Larsen's probably the only tried and tested number 9. Sasha, I think, has quality, but we don't know what his reliability is like long term. Fabio, we don't know his situation. And the number 10s, you got Arias, you got Fair Lopez, you got Manetzi that could play there, and then it's just all the other ones. I think Enzo Gonzalez probably has to go out on loan, and then it's Wang and Gedge really. So I think in terms of incomings, I think, like you said, wing back at least one side, probably your left wing back will need to definitely be done. Midfielder, centre back, forward or two. So I think he's still 4 or 5 signings away, which I don't think is impossible for Wolves. I think, look, you've still got another 4 weeks of the transfer window, I think. So I think that's doable. And like I said, closer to the season, when people realise they're not going to be getting the minutes, I think that's when you'll be able to, get some good deals. So I think it's easy to panic now because, like I said earlier, Vitor said he wanted his signings in early, but you look at all the past windows. I remember I did live streams, people were rating them 7 or 8 out of 10. And that's when we had 2 players signed before the season. So, by the end of it, I think it's easy for me to say, but judge the window at the end of the window, basically. And we'll see. It'll be interesting start of the season. City's always going to be a tough game. I don't think we can expect to go there, and it's not a given that we're going to get anything out of that game, although obviously I'd like us to. Then we have got some winnable fixtures after that. If we drop points in them, I think the club will get a lot of stick if they haven't got signings in before then, because people feel like we've lost out where
Yeah.
if the team was prepared and ready, we could have been competing a little bit better. But it's not a great place, social media, at the moment. So I just hope things speed up a little bit anyway.
Yeah, you can say that again. I think I was speaking to John, who's a Fulham fan, about an hour ago, and he was saying to me that again, Fulham are one of those clubs that they haven't operated really in the window. I mean, Wolves operated still, a lot better than clubs like Fulham, for example. But Fulham fans aren't.
Everton as well have been really slow.
I
saw David Moyes. I posted on my Twitter earlier, and because just to say, like, look, it's not just Wolves in this situation.
No, exactly. It's in sort of Fulham's case, Fulham have never been a club that have acted early in the transfer window. They tend to sit back, wait to see how it plays out for other clubs, and then they pick up the loose scraps. And those loose scraps often tend to do really well. So I think it's all about clubs' approaches, and it's exactly the same with Everton. I mean, they brought in Tierno Barry, but other than that, they actually haven't added much quality to the squad. And obviously, their squad is still nowhere near probably what Moyes wants next season. And to be fair, to build on what they had last season, I think it's one of them interesting ones. So yeah, I don't think people should panic, but I don't, I'm not here to tell people how to feel, but equally, it's been a bit of an interesting one. Now, the final point I've got on the window, I think one of the interesting points that, I've seen discussed a fair bit on social, but not too much of it really, obviously, is the sort of Alverca stuff. Now, obviously a club that's, involved with Vinicius Junior and that sort of thing, and they look like they're going to be one of the next Portuguese clubs to obviously been promoted as well. One of the next clubs to sort of try and break into that clutch of Sporting Lisbon, Benfica, Porto, Braga, those sort of clubs. They sort of have that ambition to be one of them, and obviously they've signed Bastian Mapuyu and Chiquinho from Wolves. So I'm just wondering your takes on them deals, really, because it's a very interesting one at the minute.
Yeah, I think that last week when I checked, they'd signed 22 new players, Alverca. So I think they, like you said, I mean, we had it before, Family Cow, who we loaned a lot of players to, and they actually kicked on and did quite well. I think they came close to it. They may have got European football a few years ago. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I think Chiquinho is a weird one. I think injuries have let him down a little bit. A dreadful loan decision from Wolves last year. I think he just completely picked the wrong club. Barely got any minutes in Spain last year. Moypu's a weird one because we spent nearly 5 million on him last summer. And he's gone there. I don't even know if they've paid any money for him, but he's gone there on a permanent deal. And we've got a buyback clause, apparently, which Wolves are likely to trigger. But so I don't know. It's almost like a glorified loan, but I just don't get if it's for PSR. I just don't get the thinking behind it. But both, I think it's a good level for both of them. A team that's sort of the underdogs next season. Chiquinho has quality. Again, I think we've got a buyback on him, but he's got quality, which hasn't been able to show it enough. I think in the last few years, I don't know, he's probably older than I think now, maybe like 25, and he's just not had the opportunity to play regular football. Yeah. Same with Moypu as well. Came to Wolves with a lot of promise, so just needs, I think a good level of football, sort of lower end of the top Portuguese league. You're playing top level football, you're against some good teams, but you hopefully get in sort of at least 20 to 30 plus games next season. I think that's good for Wolves. So, be interesting to see how it goes. Be interesting to see if we make any more moves with teams like that. Obviously, Joe Hodge went to Tondela as well, I think, in Portugal. So it sounds like we're doing favours to George Mendes here. So we need a couple back, really, I think. So, but no, I'm interested. I will be keeping an eye on those because I think it's an interesting level for them both to be playing at.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, they're going to be testing themselves against good teams. And even the teams outside of that clutch of 4 or 5 teams, there is some real quality in there throughout the league as well. So, yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to see. But sort of moving on to next season now, obviously, it looks like there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment. But sort of if Wolves were to start the season, on the 28th of July, we're recording this. If Wolves were to start the season today, how would you be feeling going into it? Sort of, how confident would you be feeling?
I'm always quietly confident. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, yeah, we're going to, break into the European spots. But I'm always confident. I think especially with someone like Vitor in the dugout, I think we'll, be competitive and, make a decent account of ourselves. I just don't want us to have a season where, we get into January and we're still around sort of 17th, 16th and looking over our shoulder. I think I want to be in the position where we're always looking forward and thinking, oh, we're only 3 points away from 10th, or we're only 6 points away from 7th or whatever, and continue with that. So I think we've got the quality to do so. And again, I think I'll be able to sort of solidify my answer come the end of August and, when the transfers window's done. But I have full faith for that, and I think every team outside the traditional top six, we want it'd be nice to have a nice little cup run as well. But which again, I think Wolves are more than capable in doing. So, I think Wolves are better than a handful of teams in the division. We've just got to show that more often, and I'm sure I have a lot more confidence and faith than a number of fans, which I always have done. I've never been one to be overly negative. To be fair,
No.
always try and look at the positives, like we've mentioned. So I think we'll be okay. Probably lower mid-table, sort of 13th, 14th finish, which again isn't the best in the world, but solidifies another season in the Premier League. I think this year it's been annoying for Wolves because every year for the past 4 years has felt like a transitional season. But I think this one really is under Vitor. Massive changes, upstairs in the boardroom and things like that. So they've just got to get this right. I don't think they're getting loads of fans on side at the moment, just with how slow they've started. But I think if people sit back and, like we've mentioned, look at the other clubs, Everton, Fulham, I think Brentford as well. I know you've had a Brentford fan on in a similar situation. So, there's clubs in strange situations. So I think it's best just to wait later on in the window to see where we are.
Yeah, I don't think you can get too bogged down about it, really. I think I'm sort of that opinion as well. I don't think there's that much to be pessimistic about because of how long is left for Wolves to act and stuff like that. So, and also realistically, if there's, I think we'd be far more worried if, Vitor Pereira wasn't the man that he is as well. The man that he is very much sort of the culture's completely changed in terms of in the dressing room, definitely. Maybe not so much in the in the fan base, in the grounds, 100% it has, especially in the away ends as well. But in terms of maybe on social media, there's obviously we're going to always find the negative sort of Nellies and the repeat offenders. But I do think in terms of club culture and stuff like that, I do think that's massively something that's positive to go into next season. And I do think they'll be absolutely fine. And plus, like we were saying the other week when we spoke in person, it's sort of being in that 13th, 14th area that gives you the platform then to go. Do you know what? Top 10 next season. Then Conference League, stuff like that. So there is that natural progression. And
I think that's just been the only concern for Wolves fans, though, because I think that makes sense, and we'd want to be doing that. But for Wolves, it's been the opposite, where we're just sliding down the table each season. So that's why I think this season we just need a bit of stability. We do need more players in, definitely, but a bit of stability, growing. And I think Vitor Pereira has been good. I think he's been out in the press and says, I want a mid-table finish. He's not been saying we should aim for Europa. I think obviously that's going to be his long-term goal, but he's been saying to the press, I think, we need to know where we are, mid-table, let's try and push for that and then go from there. And I think that's fair enough. He's sensible, he's realistic, he knows what he's talking about in regards to that. I think he's been getting a bit ahead of himself in regards to transfers, in my opinion. But I think he quickly realised that anyway. So I think it's key for Wolves to sort of end this sort of downward slump and have a lot more positive moments this year than we have done.
Yeah, I do think Vitor Pereira is the man for that as well. I don't think when you look at like Bruno Lage, as much as actually realistically, when you look back at the placements with Bruno Lage, it actually really was decent compared to obviously what Wolves have seen for years. But in terms of as a personality, as someone to sort of spearhead Wolves going forward, I think he is the perfect man for it. And I just hope that sort of he doesn't continue the trend doesn't continue whether perhaps the managers haven't been backed or they haven't been supported in the right way or anything like that. But I don't think it will. I think it's definitely a time for change. Now, in terms of going into next season, I do think that it will be, like I say, comfortable for Wolves. But for you, as a fan, what do you think perhaps, if you had to pick three positives going into the season, what are three things you're most excited about? Maybe players, maybe moments, maybe stuff like that. Just generally three things that you're most excited about.
I think seeing John Arias is one, to be fair. Also, seeing John Arias is one. I think, with the hype that's around him at the moment, really interested to see how he can sort of help fill that Cunha void that's there. I think seeing the development of certain players, Fer Lopez, how he I think everyone sort of expected him just to be a squad option. I think there's every chance, if he continues to impress, he could be a starter in the team. So seeing the development of players like him, Keanu Hoover, if the chance, Rodrigo Gomez, if he's given minutes as well. And number three, I think just to see how we fare sort of on sort of on all fronts, really, because I think Vitor Pereira I'm excited about. He's in his last year of his Wolves contract as well, so he needs to, be interesting to see what the situation is there, and hopefully he signs a new deal. But just to see how we can compete and how we could start the season probably is a better way for me to phrase it, because Wolves have been really slow in starting Premier League seasons over the last couple of years. So that's what I'm excited to see. How can we start? City at home is obviously a tough game, but then we've got some pretty favourable fixtures after that. So how can we start? And I think if the Wolves can start positively, there's every chance we can continue that momentum and end up having a real solid season, really.
Yeah, I do think that's been the issue in recent years, hasn't it? Massively, the momentum has been none. There's obviously been, no stability really in terms of managers. There's been, injuries to key players, and also players. Some of them just frankly aren't good enough as well. And just generally, there's been a lot of inconsistency, obviously. And also, I don't think anywhere the expectation helps at all. I think the sort of, in a way, Wolves were almost spoilt from that period of like 2017 to 2020. 2021, really. It's like the expectation is now that all of a sudden, Wolves should be back in Europe. That's just, I also think that when you look at the European spots now, the squads are outrageous for some of the sides. Villa are a side that have had a really poor window. They brought in one 18-year-old lad in Zepaqueno Redmond, but look at the squad. They've got two players in every position nearly. And midfield options is absolutely ludicrous for a side of that quality. And you look at the sides when sort of Wolves running around it, and that clutch of teams wasn't anywhere near as strong as it is now, really. And that's not taking any credit away from Wolves, but it's just showing the fact that, teams have spent big. PSR has meant other teams can't spend big. And just generally, the state of play has massively changed in those few years. So I don't think expectation helps. But I'm glad we've covered the season, really. And I just wanted to know your sort of predictions for next season, sort of where you think you'll finish in and around, really.
Yeah, I think probably sort of that lower mid-table spot. I think 13th, 14th is probably where I think a lot of Wolves fans now would probably shake your hand and say, yeah, we'll take that. I think there'll be other fans still thinking that we're going to get relegated. But I just, like I said, I think we're strong enough. I think although the transfers have been slow, I think we've got enough quality in the team. It will need players, it will, but we've got quality in the dugout as well in Vitor. So I think we'll be absolutely fine. And like I said, if you can add a decent cup run on there, I wouldn't say no. So I think we'll be okay. But it's just important, I think, start the season strongly. And like I said, hopefully not looking over our shoulder for periods of the season like we were last year.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. Now, the only sort of last thing I wanted to cover really is sort of, it's related to the Wolves massively, but it's not really related to the Premier League season and stuff like that. I wanted to cover sort of the Wolves Content Creators Cup. Obviously, taking part in that yet again. Obviously a brilliant cause. I think raised over $8,000 last year as well. Yeah. Obviously bigger this year as well. 2 more teams in it with the Walsall and Spurs lads. So I'm just wanting to sort of, for people who perhaps probably aren't as familiar with it as some, because I know there are a lot of Wolves fans dialed into it, and a lot of Wolves fans do know. But for maybe people who are watching this who aren't Wolves fans, what is the Content Creators Cup and sort of what is the aim of it really? Yeah,
so it was created a couple of years ago by Dazzling Dave at Wise Wolves Fan TV. And he says, well, why? Because we played a couple of games at Molineux before, and we sort of said, why aren't we making this a more regular thing, or an interesting thing? So, obviously, as you would expect, with Wolves becoming stable Premier League team, there's been more content popping up, new podcasts and stuff. So Dave says, well, let's put this tournament together. So yeah, I think this will be the 3rd year. So the first year and second year, continue growing, raise more money. And yeah, it's at Compton training ground, the Wolves training ground. They have like a dome there, so the pitch is split into 2. So you've got 2 games running at once. I think it's 7-a-side. So yeah, it was 7-a-side last year. And it was really good. I mean, we had our team first year got to the final. We lost out to the Wolf Whistle podcast, who did have some very good players like ex-semi-pros and stuff. It was a tough game. And then last year we ended up winning the whole thing. Talking Wolves won the whole thing, but it was. I say it to a lot of people. I don't know how, because we weren't very good, and we just parked 7 men behind the ball and won on penalties in the final. So, but I'm interested. I think everyone's going to be a little bit savvier with who they're bringing this year, and and playing. So, but yeah, obviously it's all for the Wolves Foundation. Things. It's a great cause, but you can come and watch. I think is it's the first weekend in September on the Saturday. I think it's the 3rd of September, maybe. So yeah, you know, you can come to Compton and watch it, and whether you spend an hour there, or whether you want to watch the full tournament, it's up to you guys. But no, it's really good fun, and you speak to people that maybe you only see once a year, a couple of times a year, you know, and like you said earlier, bringing in a couple of different teams this year as well, which will be fun and interesting. But yeah, great cause, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think for anyone who's not aware now, it's a great cause. I think it's £3 entry for you to go and watch it. It's obviously all going to the Wolves Foundation, and it's going to be a great event. I think it's on the 6th of September. So if anyone wants to go, you're more than welcome. And I think it's going to be a really great cause. And it's one of these things that I've been keeping sort of track on the last few years. And it's massively sort of grown to a point where now, obviously, like I say, there's 12 teams. And I think it'd be great for, everyone who is a Wolves fan, people who perhaps aren't even Wolves fans as well, just go and see some of your favourite creators and some of your favourite sort of people in the Wolves sphere, really. And maybe even the Spurs or the Walsall sphere as well. So, yeah, I think it's a really exciting event and it'll be great to see you there. So, yeah, I'm sure if people want to go, I'll also leave the link to the website in the description as well. I'll also leave all of Dave's links, socials, Talking Wolves links as well, and the YouTube channel in the description as well. But thank you for joining me, Dave, and chatting to me and taking your time out of your day. I really appreciate it, mate.
My pleasure, mate. Really enjoyed it, and thank you for having me.